Hello and welcome to the Week in Parliament. We know we're leaving the EU, but how's the exit plan coming along?
I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, yes, we do have a plan.
Isn't the truth that the government is making a total shambles of Brexit and nobody understands what a strategy actually is?
Yep.
We've got Brexit ministers and a Brexit department. Do we really need a Brexit committee as well? Certainly we do, says this MP.
The negotiation that we are, as a nation, about to embark on, really the most complex we have faced for decades. A lot rests on it.
We talked to the chair of the new Brexit committee. And the leaves are falling. It's almost time for the autumn statement. Anyone remember what happened last year?
So the Shadow Chancellor literally stood at the dispatch box and read out from Mao's little red book.
But first, Brexit in the chamber, Brexit in the committee rooms. Britain's EU departure was being debated everywhere you went in Parliament. As the new Committee for Exiting the EU was holding its first inquiry session, the party leaders at Prime Minister's questions were, once again, doing battle over how the whole process was going. A leaked memo written by the consultancy firm Deloitte suggested there were 500 Whitehall projects underway related to Brexit, and civil servants were struggling to cope with the workload. Jeremy Corbyn read from the leaked memo.
No common strategy has emerged, in part because of the divisions within the Cabinet. If this memo is, as the Prime Minister's press department says, written by ill-informed consultants, could she put the government's plan and common strategy for Brexit before Parliament?
Well, I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, yes, we do have a plan. Is to deliver the best possible deal in trading with and operating within the European Union. Our plan is to deliver control of movement from people from the European Union into the United Kingdom.
Well, the word doesn't seem to have travelled very far, Mr. Speaker, and I have to say I sympathise with the Italian government minister this week who said about her government, somebody needs to tell us something, it needs to be something that makes sense. Isn't the truth that the government is making a total shambles of Brexit and nobody understands what a strategy actually is?
Of course, those in the European Union who we will be negotiating with will want us to set out at this stage every detail of our negotiating strategy. If we were to do that, it would be the best possible way of ensuring that we got the worst result for this country. That's why we won't do it.
I'm sure that there's a question that's vexing not just the First Minister but the whole of Scotland, that on the 22nd of June of this year, Ruth Davidson stated to those supporting Leave they won't tell us what they want to replace the single market with. Now that the Prime Minister is part of a government dragging Scotland out of the European Union against its sovereign will, could she answer Ruth Davidson?
And on the 23rd of June, the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and that's what this government will deliver.
It is right that the Prime Minister has latitude to enter into negotiations with the EU. However, the Vote Leave campaign were very clear that the rights of EU citizens would not be affected if this country voted to leave the EU. My parents are Italian. They've never naturalised and they've been in this country for 50 years. Can the Prime Minister assure me that she will never instruct me to vote in a lobby to take away the rights of my parents and millions of EU citizens?
I recognise the personal passion with which my honourable friend raises this issue. I want, intend and expect to be able to guarantee the rights of those EU citizens who are living here in the United Kingdom. But I also want to see the rights of UK citizens living in European Union member states being guaranteed too. as I've said previously, I would hope that this is an issue on which we can come to a position on which we can discuss with my European colleagues at an early stage.
Theresa May. Well, also on Wednesday, a new committee of MPs was starting its detailed examination into the whole process of leaving the EU. The chair of the committee focused on a report from the Institute for Government think tank. It had warned that Whitehall didn't have the capacity to deliver Brexit on top of everything else.
It's talked about existential threats to government departments because of the challenge they've got, and the process externally appearing to some people as somewhat chaotic and dysfunctional. So I wanted to begin by asking you, Dr. White, how do you think it's going? And in particular, do you think that civil servants involved in this process have got A, the direction, the political direction, and B, the resources they need in order to undertake the task?
We have not actually said that there is any existential threat to any government department.
Right.
We were reporting that as having been said to us. And what we said in our blog yesterday, which has been picked up this morning by The Times, is that we didn't recognise the numbers. We don't know anything about the provenance of this memo, and there's been a lot of speculation about that online. But having been out and about in Whitehall in the past weeks and months, talking to lots of people in lots of different departments, also talking to people outside government who have been trying to get their voices heard within government, we do recognise some of the pressures which are reflected in that memo, which are being experienced by Whitehall.
What if I were determined simply to leave the European Union, to trigger Article 50 and to conclude the bare minimum required to leave? What would Article 50 actually require me to agree? I simply want the divorce on the quickest possible terms. So what do I need in that quickie divorce?
Mr Gove was told there was no quick fix solution to the issue of EU nationals living in Britain.
We have no record of how many EU nationals are living in the UK. And there are various options which have been mooted, and I think there's been quite a lot of agreement that those who've been living here a long time should be given a right to stay. But there's a lot of problems about how to actually prove that an individual's been living here for a long time. If you're an academic, you'll have contracts, and you can have a paper trail to show you've got that. But if you are a seasonal worker working in a farm in Lincolnshire, some of those farmers aren't so good on the paperwork. And particularly if you're here for a few months, go away, come back, or you've got other jobs, you might go work in France or whatever for a little bit, then go back to Poland. It's very difficult to prove. And the trouble is, this is highly resource intensive. If you do a case-by-case analysis of up to 3 million people who are here, the resource implications of that are vast. And so, going to your point about a quickie divorce, the quickie divorce would say everyone who's here on either 23rd of June or on 31st of March 2019 should have the right to stay, irrespective of the paperwork.
So, some moments there from Wednesday's first meeting of the new Brexit committee. I'm delighted to say that joining us in the studio is the chairman of that committee you saw there, Hilary Benn, joining us on the Week in Parliament. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. First of all, what was your impression of that first meeting? Were you quite pleased with the way things went?
I thought it was a very interesting session because the negotiation that we are, as a nation, about to embark on, really the most complex we have faced for decades, a lot rests on it, is going to have various moving parts. And we were trying to tease out today from our witnesses how they think this is going to work and what's going to happen in what order, because there is both the divorce settlement with the European Union. It's like if two people get divorced, that's agreeing who's getting which CDs and who's going to pay the outstanding gas and electricity bill over here. But then the second part is, so what is our future economic, trading, political relationship going to be with the European Union? And we had this as the first evidence session to help inform the subsequent witnesses that we're going to hear from.
Now, Margaret Hodge told us on this very programme that 21 members is far too big a committee. It's not going to make for forensic questioning because you can't focus in on one issue. Is your committee too big, and how did it get to be too big?
Well, the answer to that question rests with others and not me. I stood for the post of chair of the Brexit Select Committee, knowing there would be 21 members, and that is what I now have responsibility for. So we tried to organise the questioning in a way that allows us to cover all of the areas.
It's obviously known that some of members of your committee are obviously on one side. Dominic Raab, and you've got Peter Lilly and Michael Gove, obviously big players in the Leave camp. So why should we believe that we're getting objective questioning when we have MPs that are so well associated with one side of the argument?
Well, it is particularly contested territory, precisely because we've just come out of this enormously important referendum where opinion was very divided. The nation is very divided. But I think if you look at the committee as a whole, we've got a balance of views. And I think the task for us is, regardless of which side of the argument we're on, if we all agree the aim now is to try and get the best deal for Britain, is to understand, OK, what is that going to involve? It's always important with select committees, but I think it would be particularly important here to inform a view about what needs to be done, what we should be seeking and in what order. And the other thing is, it's all very well us as members of the committee having a view about what we think should happen, or indeed the British government. There are 27 other countries on the other side of the negotiating table, and they've got a view too.
And you, yourself, big Remain campaigner, can we trust you as the chief interrogator?
Well, I hope so, but that's you have to ask other people. Look, I have said I campaign passionately for Remain. I am devastated by the result. I think it's the wrong decision for the future of Britain. But we are Democrats, and we have to accept the outcome of the referendum.
And I was going to ask you, is the government being too secretive? Because that's the view of a lot of people about how things have gone, which a lot of months have now gone by since June the 23rd.
Well, it is 5 months, and I think we are, personally, the committee hasn't formed a view yet, personally I think we are getting to the point where the government is going to have to set out what its objectives are. Now, let's be clear, nobody is expecting the government to reveal its full negotiating hand, fallback positions, red lines and so on. Of course, they must have the space to negotiate. But when it comes to what kind of access to the single market are we seeking, what plans does the government have for controlling free movement? Are we going to remain members of the European Medicines Agency, which is important to the pharmaceutical industry, Europol, the European Aviation Safety Authority? And I think the second thing is this, that there is a debate about whether you can complete the whole process, divorce proceedings and agreeing a new relationship with Europe in 2 years.
I suppose the number of organisations that you could invite to your sessions is just about limitless. Everyone has a view.
Yep.
How are you going to select those people you want to hear from and those you don't?
Well, we are working in partnership with all of the other select committees, both in the Commons and in the Lords. I think what we're looking for is, for the purposes of our first report, is what are the main themes, what are the main issues that have got to be addressed, what about timing and sequencing? Has the government got the capacity to do this work? And that's one of the things we discussed today.
And can I just ask you about that report? Will it be a united report?
Well, all select committees hope, of course, to achieve.
But it's not likely to be with such polarised views.
We will have to wait and see. I'm not going to prejudge what the report is going to say or how the select committee is going to decide it. But I think it is important for the country that, although we were very divided in the referendum as a nation, it is in our common interest, whatever view we took, and that includes select committee, to come together and to say, right, what are the things that we now agree need to be done? Now, there will be some difference of view, I'm absolutely sure about that. But select committee reports, of course, have more influence if they are unanimous. We know that.
The problem is, if it's a united report, will it just be a bland document?
Well, I suppose it'll be a bit like Goldilocks' porridge in the end. We're going to have to find, you know, just right.
Hilary Benn, thanks very much indeed for joining us on The Week in Parliament.
Thank you.
Well, long before we'd voted to leave the EU, Parliament had decided to reduce the number of MPs at Westminster as a way of cutting the cost of politics. The figure is due to go down from 650 to 600. But a Labour MP says the reduction will undermine democracy and give the people less of a say. She put forward a bill to keep the number at 650. She said the newly drawn constituencies are far too big.
If someone from my constituency from the north wants to come and see me at a surgery in the south, given that lines of communication go east-west in that part of the country, It will take them all day on public transport and they will need an overnight stay. That cannot be acceptable.
My constituencies are deeply, deeply worried. They think they will lose representation. Cumbria is not just large mileage-wise, square mileage, but it has mountains, it has lakes, it has difficult weather. A lot of the time you can't get from one part of it to the other, and people on the Solway would lose their representation.
My constituents wouldn't find it possible to travel from one end of the constituency to another by public transport. So what I do is I go to them, which I consider to be my job as a Member of Parliament.
My constituency of Caithness and Easter Ross will be incorporated into a larger constituency called Highland North, which is 13,000 square kilometres, the same size as Northern Ireland. Nobody would seriously suggest that Northern Ireland is covered by one MP, but that's what these proposals suggest for Scotland.
And we face a boundary review being conducted on a completely lopsided electoral register, and if we proceed as planned, we will see a huge transfer of parliamentary representation from areas that are growing to areas that actually have not seen the same level of growth.
The primary reason for the boundary changes and using a more up-to-date register is to have more equal votes, more equal-sized constituencies, so our constituents are more fairly represented in this House.
We've now already had 500 hours of public hearings, 20 members of staff involved, 21 assistant commissioners, 14 videographers, 36 public hearings across England, the last ones of which are taking place today. The cost of scrapping all that and redrawing the boundaries on this completely new proposal, even if it could get through in time, that would surely run into many millions of pounds.
And although Pat Glass's bill won the initial approval of the Commons, it's most unlikely to become law. Now, a look at some of the other stories around Parliament in the last 7 days. Labour peers have put pressure on a minister for the return of national identity cards following the scrapping of the scheme 6 years ago when the Labour government was replaced by the coalition.
My Lords, for the life of me, I do not understand why the government has set its mind so firmly against the idea of having an identity card or identity document. It's common practice in many, many parts of the world.
The greatest civil liberties is not to have your identity stolen. And we have found in the banking world, in other worlds, by having biometric cards that identify clearly who you are, this can be avoided. And they cannot be duplicated easily because they are biometric.
The passport now has facial, certainly the e-passport has facial recognition, which is a very good system of identity. But, my Lords, we will not be moving to the identity card scheme.
Problems in our jails. As prison officers stage a day of action over increasing violence, Labour accuses the Justice Secretary of not getting a grip on the situation.
What the Secretary of State has consistently failed to acknowledge is that this is a service in crisis, and the protest action by prison officers today is the clearest sign yet of the fact that this is a crisis over which she and her ministerial colleagues have lost control. This, Mr. Speaker, is a Secretary of State in denial.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is disgraceful that the honourable gentleman refuses to condemn illegal industrial action that is putting our hard-working frontline prison staff at risk. It is completely irresponsible. I have made it absolutely clear, ever since I was appointed in this role, that safety is my #1 priority.
A beaming Nigel Farage, fresh from Brexit success, meets victorious Donald Trump in New York. An SNP MP wonders about official recognition for the UKIP man.
Can the Prime Minister confirm or deny if there have been any official conversations at any level regarding giving Nigel Farage a peerage?
Well, all I can say to the honourable gentleman, I'm afraid, is that such matters are normally never discussed in public.
Carry on as you are. After a change of heart, the House of Lords won't, after all, suffer a removal of its powers to vote down certain types of legislation.
The government is therefore reliant on the discipline and self-regulation that this House imposes upon itself.
What the government has done 12 months on is to have listened very carefully to the voices around the House and decided the best way forward is the way the House always proceeds, which is by agreement, at a pace and with perspective.
How to put the best gloss on events. You've finished painting the bedroom and there's plenty left over. MPs discuss what to do with those leftover tins of matte emulsion.
Now, presently, only 2% of paint and other coating is reused or remanufactured, and most of the remaining 98% is lost to us as a resource, principally because it is incinerated or because it ends up in landfill.
Far too few, first of all, of household waste and recycling centres are accepting paint. There should be a universal approach to this, not a postcode lottery.
Perhaps having extended producer responsibility on the paint industry might be the way to go. That's not currently part of the being considered in the circular economy package by the EU, but it might be something we want to consider when we leave the EU.
And whether they're producing red, white or rosé, the vineyards of England are a growing success, say MPs, who want the Chancellor to support the domestic wine industry.
This is a potential success story. English wine is no longer a joke. People are talking about it. It is a potential source of alternative rural employment.
English wine now is the fastest growing agri-sector in the UK, and last year alone it added 100 million to the UK economy.
I can say that while I was in Japan at the G7 agriculture ministers meeting earlier this year, I took the opportunity of promoting our sparkling wines at the British Embassy.
George Eustace with a glass of good news. And his ministerial colleague Philip Hammond may well on Wednesday be delivering some taxation changes to alcohol products. That's because it's the annual autumn statement in the Commons, Mr Hammond's first as Chancellor. Will it be as eventful an occasion as a year ago when the Shadow Chancellor took his reply to the autumn statement down a rather unexpected route?
To assist Comrade Osborne in his dealings with his newfound comrades, I brought him along Mao's little red book. Let me quote. Let's quote from Mao. Rarely done in this chamber. The quote is this. Behave. We must learn to do economic work from all who know how, no matter who they are. We must esteem them as teachers, learning from them respectfully and conscientiously.
So the Shadow Chancellor literally stood at the dispatch box and read out from Mao's little red book. And look, it's his personal signed copy. The problem is, half the Shadow Cabinet have been sent off to re-education.
George Osborne having the house in stitches last year. Whatever happened to him? Well, back to the present, and with a look at some of this week's other political news, here's Gary Connor.
4, 3, 2, 1,
This week was the poshest night of the Prime Minister's year. Theresa May made her first speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet, hailing post-Brexit Britain's historic opportunity to take on a new role as the global champion of free trade. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell has joined the Privy Council, the historic group which advises the monarch. The swearing-in ceremony usually involves kneeling and kissing the hand of the Queen. Fresh from winning the US election, Donald Trump might have another title to add to his collection. Foreign Office Minister Baroness Ainley accidentally introduced him as a member of the upper house.
My Lords, when my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, had a conversation on the telephone with Lord Trump...
Over in the Select Committee rooms, TV chef Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall slammed supermarkets for their approach to wonky vegetables. He said retailers are deluded in terms of what people will and won't buy. And in the Scottish Parliament, an SNP MSP has called on the UK government to take speedy action over the reduction in weight of Toblerones. Colin Beattie says that the change is emblematic of the devastating consequences of Brexit and calls on the government to offer its condolences. Chocolate.
Gary Connor and the Toblerone row. Where will it all end? The Chancellor could well have some treats in store this Wednesday when he reveals the content of his autumn statement. Plenty of other issues also coming up in the Commons and the Lords, so do join me for the next Week in Parliament. Until then, from me, Keith McDougall, goodbye.